Sometimes, as performers, we can often struggle with negative thoughts and anxious feelings that can hinder our performance on stage, causing us to not be our best selves under pressure. Overcoming these feelings often takes a lot of mental training to stay focused on your artistic vision. Today, I got to sit down with Dr. Wesley Ferreira, a clarinetist and public speaker at the forefront of this work. He is an amazing person and an amazing clarinetist, as you just heard in his recording of Into the Green. Links down below if you'd like to check it out. And he had a lot of great things to say. We had an amazing interview, a great time. And so let's get into this interview. Check it out. Welcome back, clarinet enthusiasts, to another episode of the Clarinet Channel. I'm your host, Emily Johnston, and today we are in for a very special treat. I have with me here Dr. Wesley Ferreira, a public speaker and clarinet professor at Colorado State University. He is fresh off of his tour and has made some time in his schedule to sit down with us today and share some insights into his career. So thank you so much for making the time for us today. I'm excited to have you on.
Excellent. Well, happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Ready to have some good conversations. And yeah.
Yeah, we've kind of been working on behind the scenes, getting this started for maybe about a month now. So I'm
Mhm.
excited that today is finally the day.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you had a chance to listen to the previous episode I did with Professor DeLuis at the University of Maryland, but we talked a little bit about how in a career in music you can often open doors for yourself when you lean into passions and skill sets outside of music that you might have to create a more diverse and meaningful path for yourself. And in thinking about this interview with you, I think you are just a perfect example of that by leaning into your other passions like public speaking and helping just people just achieve the best version of themselves. And so I'm really excited to learn more of that today.
Excellent.
Yeah, is there a specific moment in your career when you realized that this was a passion of yours and this was something you wanted to pursue?
Well, I've always kind of gone where my desire for personal growth has taken me. So, for example, I think what I'm doing in the world of public speaking is a natural outflow of my teaching, because when we're teaching people, we're speaking to people, we're motivating them, we're imparting our own ideas, and we're getting feedback. And I have a really great desire for my own personal growth, but also in helping others achieve their personal growth. And so a lot of the types of things I talk about have to do with that. And just even going back to studying of music or when I was younger, I always really let the things that interested me guide me along certain paths. I've always been very curious about where those types of things might lead me. And I think we generally also explore and lean into our strengths. And we all have a variety of strengths in different areas. And sometimes we think those areas aren't so connected or adjacent to music or the arts. But, we all have individual lives that I think are all very creative. I think every life is a creative life. And I like to think of it and look at it that way. And so for me, it's, in just referencing what you've talked about there, just, really leaning into those things for me has been nice in my exploration.
Yeah. A few years ago, around the time that I started college, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I started looking into a program called Bulletproof Musician. Have
Hmm.
you ever heard of this
Oh
before?
yes, oh yes,
Yeah.
yeah, with Noah Kajiyama. Yeah.
Yeah, this was around the time where I started exploring kind of ideas of how to just gain confidence on stage and just, being yourself. and maybe not getting super nervous before a big performance or a big audition. And I learned a lot, and it also helped me realize just how essential this stuff is for
Mhm.
musicians, but
Yeah.
also it's kind of not a lot of people have really dug into the mentality and shared training and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed seeing that that's kind of what you're into, and you like sharing that kind of stuff with people and training people in that way.
Yeah, I just view all human beings as, I think if we start with the position of viewing all human beings as, like really capable and very valuable in this world, that sometimes it makes me pause, and I sometimes frankly it kind of makes me sad when I see people who feel a little less than. And because I feel like no one is better than anyone else, no one is not as good as as anyone else, just as a fundamental rule for humanity. And I think in what we do as performing clarinetists or as musicians, that's really something that tends to impede us, right? Our ability, our maybe lack of confidence, or our it's frankly the things we tell ourselves, or the things that maybe others have told us that we take on. And so, I really have a great desire to help liberate people from that. And I use the word like liberate purposefully, because I think anyone who, and if they're watching, they can think about this now, anyone who feels either more confident in themselves and their place in the world in any particular area, and if they can look back and think about maybe they weren't as confident previously, it's pretty liberating. And yeah, I think that's such an important thing what we're doing as performing musicians to be working on.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously you help a lot of people and give training like mental strength training and helping people overcome nerves and anxiousness in performing. What is some of the biggest pieces of advice you give to some of your clients or some people you're trying to help gain in confidence?
Yeah, I think I often talk to people, especially musicians, who are, working on just having more groundedness and being confident in what they're doing. And I think a big thing comes down it starts with your intention, your desire. So I'm often thinking about like what's the intention? Like what do you intend to do? And intention is such a powerful thing. So let's take, for example, a student who's preparing for a recital, and they might be anticipating that they're going to be nervous, and they don't want that to happen. Talking to them about like their intention, what do they want? Why are they doing this recital? And hopefully it's beyond just a requirement. And then really talked about the positive things about performing this recital. How do they envision? Like let's imagine and use vision. Let's imagine the very best scenario. And how would you feel? And how would you be walking on stage? And how would people receive you? And it's this power of kind of creating through intention and through vision the kind of future you want, and then you can step into that. And I think it's a lot part of the advice and the work that I do is to help stop those voices in our heads, because it's the voices that make us anticipate that there's going to be an issue, and sometimes debilitatingly like make us stop moving forward towards something. So some of that is just talking about being grounded and replacing those voices that can be really mean
Mhm.
and not beneficial, and replacing those voices with sort of instruction, and replacing those voices with a vision that's so strong that you can just follow that path as you're approaching your recital, or when you're on your recital day. And then it's a lot of things like exposure to that, and these small practices. And then once you start to recognize that these things are working for you, then at least you have a path. Because I think what's hard for a lot of people is that when they're feeling either lack of confidence, or they're feeling like they're not feeling good about a situation, partly it's because there isn't a vision, or they're just not sure where to turn. And as you said earlier, when you were referencing the bulletproof musician, just having some guidance, having some direction, some idea of what the path could be for you, as you spoke about, just made you feel so much more confident that there's a quote unquote way out or way forward. So I'm glad that you brought that up to me, because I think even just having these types of conversations allow people who are hearing them to understand and to know that these are conversations that people have, sometimes behind closed doors. Sometimes we're embarrassed to talk about them, but they shouldn't be embarrassing things to talk about, because no one is, it's just very rare to find someone who's not without nerves or anxiety in anything they do. But these are things that we can grow through if we take the time to, develop them.
Wow, yeah. I really like that advice. I remember when I was a young musician, about high school age, I would say. I won't call out the person this was, but I actually did get a bad piece of advice at one point. I was told once by one of my mentors in preparing for an audition. They said to me, your level of preparation will determine how nervous you are. You shouldn't be nervous for an audition if you're prepared. And that really stuck with me all the way through high school into college. And then when I got to college, I remember this kind of built up into my head all the way up into the point where I said to my professor once, "Oh, I don't want to do this master class." It was a big master class with a big name, clarinetist, because I'm going to be nervous. And he said to me, he was like, well, you're going to be nervous for the master class. You're going to be nervous for a recital, but you got to do it too. And it kind of flipped my like way of thinking into, oh wait, you're supposed to feel this way. It's normal, it's natural. And so around that same time is exactly when I started looking into the Bulletproof Musician and started really diving into these ideas.
Yeah, and I think what your example there was a great example of something. Sometimes I often think about is your desire to succeed greater than your fear of failure? And so I bet you in that situation, you really wanted to do the master class. Like it would have been something, and if we had created a scenario where you did the master class, you felt great about it. This is again that visioning. Of course you'd want to do it. So is the desire to do it and do it well greater than the fear? And the fear, like you said, is going to be there. It's always going to be there. I even imagine you starting this podcast, that I'm sure you were maybe more nervous the first few times than you are now. And same thing for me. Here I am on this podcast, and I can tell you I was way more nervous for the first few podcasts I've ever done than this one. And so this is like our task in life, I think, is to keep exploring, to keep growing, despite the fears or the, being unsure. Because yeah, I think it's just such an important thing in life.
Yeah, it's kind of like the higher the risk, the higher the reward.
Yeah, because growth only comes through. I was going to say growth only comes through struggle, and that's the truth. And struggle can be like a small s struggle.
Hmm.
Like any kind of growth you make, and for us musicians, we know that exactly. We know that maybe better than most people. Maybe athletes also know that too. Is that improvement doesn't come without having some setbacks or having a little bit of struggles. But if you think about anything in life, just thinking about it all now, that there's always going to be a little bit of struggle, and it's the pushing through that makes us proud when we achieve anything in that area. So yeah, I'm glad
Yeah.
we're having this conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it also kind of eases your mind. You kind of briefly touched on this earlier, but to recognize that kind of everybody goes through this. Everybody feels nervous. Everybody has those moments where they feel like, oh, I don't know if I can do this or whatever. But even the greatest professionals, and so it kind of eases your mind to know that this is just a normal feeling that you're feeling, and you can get through this.
Yeah, and I love that word you use. It's a normal feeling. And I feel like we don't use that word normal enough, right? Um, we just don't use the word normal enough, I think, when we're talking about, yeah, the things we fear or the things that are struggle for people. It's absolutely normal. And it's been normal throughout human history.
Hmm.
It's been completely normal, right? So if you think about even like little kids and they're not born walking, And as they start to walk, first it's a crawl, then they're standing, then they're wobbling, then they fall down. And imagine a parent, criticizing that the first steps, and trying to um, micromanage or tell them, oh, don't worry about it, just try, but don't fall, but try. I mean, that's very confusing. I think the way humans learn is to experiment and fail, and the issue becomes when we start to critique those things. So sometimes with my students, I'll really celebrate, quote unquote, when they fail something, and it seems counterintuitive. And because it means they try. Like, I'd rather celebrate them going for it, and maybe there's a little bit of setback, and what can we learn from this? But really celebrating the fact that something happened and maybe didn't go as planned, but celebrating it. Because we too often will start to pick apart, and we'll say, well, this is why you failed. This is why. And that whole kind of language is about saying that failure is not good. This is what we want to avoid, failure. And so let's work to prevent it. We just have to be able to hold everything at the same time, because nothing is black and white in this world. And so we have to be able to say, sure, and I think in a lighthearted, curious way, sure, we don't want to experience those failures, but what can the failures teach us, and what's positive about that? And do we want to try it to be, do we want it to be different next time? And if we do, okay. But I think language is such a powerful thing that I'm often thinking about the type of language we use, or I might use, when speaking to people, in a way that can turn what is sometimes viewed as negative into something that's actually positive and powerful. In that idea of celebrating the fear, or celebrating the fact that we can get through it, versus dwelling on the fear, versus criticizing ourselves for the feelings we have. It's just not necessary.
Yeah. Wow, I love it. I think these are some amazing pearls of wisdom you're giving us here now. Do you have someone or something that you learned all that from, or do you feel like this is just stuff you've learned over your years of being a clarinetist?
Yeah, I've certainly have read a lot of things and consume, videos on YouTube, and listen to things a lot. But it's also a lot of reflection as well. A lot of thinking about what I want, because of course I also have been nervous, and growing up and developing, and it's something that I too wanted to overcome. And so I really thought about the ways that I felt nervous and why, and examined that. In working with my own students, I can see that happening in them. And then, of course, it's a little bit of experimentation sometimes on my end. Like, if I frame something different to them, I can see how they light up. And so as a teacher, I'm thinking, well, that's a positive thing to say, isn't it? So, or as I help prepare them, say for a recital, the way I walk them through it, if I feel like they're being uplifted, then I know this is a truth. This is something that humans appreciate. I think it even goes down to things like, I'm a father, I have children, I reflect about how I was raised. I keep my eye on what's happening in the world, and again, in the way people speak to each other, and so it all kind of comes together for me in a synthesis of really wanting to uplift people, and studying kind of how those things happen.
Yeah, yeah, this is, I feel like a perfect segue into one of the other questions I wanted to ask you, which was, do you feel like all of this wisdom and knowledge that you have gained kind of blends into your teaching style at Colorado State?
Yeah, for sure it does.
Mhm.
And I think any teacher would say that the more experience they gain, the more they have an understanding of themselves. They have an understanding of students and what works with students. And I'm someone who likes to continue to learn and grow in my teaching and in my playing, and so, like, my goal is always to continue to be a better player and a better teacher. And so, I think I lost sight of your question there, but yeah, maybe you can re-ask that question.
Yeah, so like if a student is kind of struggling with being nervous or anxious or just self-confidence at all, do you feel like you're able to impart some of these wisdoms and help them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was just speaking to some of my students this week that, I have the great fortune, and you mentioned in the opening that I just came off of a tour, that I do get to perform a lot. I get to perform a lot as a soloist and as a chamber musician and orchestral player in a lot of different settings. And so I'm always bringing those experiences back. I was telling a student this week, there isn't one time that I come back from a performance that someone couldn't ask me, "What did you learn?" that I couldn't answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always thinking about how a certain experience is allowing me to grow. And sometimes it's in a way that you don't expect. But I think if you're always focusing on that, you can find those things. So, for example, maybe you're playing something for the 50th time and you've done it so many times. And maybe you're starting to sense that you're getting tired of it. And I've been there too. So, in those situations, what I think about are, how can I grow through even this experience? And so recently that happened. I'm on tour and playing similar music. Maybe the conditions aren't as favorable as they were a few concerts ago, but I'm thinking about how can I still perform my best? Like, how can I go deeper with my focus? How can I communicate with the audience in a way that is different than the way I did when the conditions were better? And so I'm always imparting, always bringing to my students a lot of my own experiences. And I think it's a little bit the way I'm wired, that I'm always looking to grow. I'm always looking to better myself, but also use those experiences and that to help others. It's a little bit of why, someone who is listening and may know me may be hearing for the first time that I'm doing some public speaking. And that's not something that I maybe could have done 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. But it gets to a certain point where you accumulate so much experience and wisdom, as you said, and have such a desire to impart that onto others, even just beyond the clarinet or even beyond classical music, that's kind of what led me to that avenue. And so absolutely, I would hope my students would benefit from my experiences in that area and in everything that I do.
Yeah, for sure. As I get older and more experienced as a clarinetist, the auditions and performances like this they always seemed daunting and like, oh, this is really nerve-wracking and I don't know how it's gonna go. But after a while, I feel like I slowly started to learn that it's almost kind of like a roller coaster ride. Like you're waiting in line and like the waiting and hearing other people go is almost like makes you really, really nervous. And then the moment is just over in a flash. Like you get on the ride and then the next thing you know, it's just over. It was like 2 minutes and then you're done. And then you get off and it was just like, oh, I wish I was back in that moment. Like I want to go again. I always call it
Oh,
like the roller coaster effect.
yeah, that's really great because as you're saying that, what I really hear is that you actually really like the part of playing. Like you love the part of working towards or being in that position where you're playing because when you finish, you're like, oh, I wish I could relive that because it's enlivening me as I'm in that moment playing. And I think it's such a great sign just hearing you say that is the best part, right? The part that's not so comfortable might be the waiting or all those thoughts that may come into your head. Even just hearing you speak, giving that example, it makes me think a lot about how our struggles sometimes have to do with control and our desire to be in control and a little bit of not accepting that there's so much beyond our control. So, we can control how we prepare for something. We can't control what other people think. We can't control if there's players that we think are better than us. We don't even know whether someone who we think is better than us actually will be better than us in their audition, or whether the people will hear them as better than us. We don't know what the people are looking for. We don't know. There's so much that we don't know, but it's funny how our brain starts to find reasons to make that a problem.
Mm,
And so, what I spoke about earlier, a lot of that clearing of the mind, I think, has to do with really just trusting your process, but
mhm,
really understanding that what you can't control isn't something to be concerned about. I'm my partner in my duo, clarinet guitar duo, Jâca Jackson. We often talk about, we're often playing in a different facility, and so much can be different. Just so much can be different acoustically, um, to how we're received, to even the way, how much travel we had to do that day before getting. And so for us, we've kind of developed this thing where we'll say, that's none of my business. And it's kind of a freeing way because it'll be like, I wonder how many people are there tonight. And sometimes we'll think, well, if there's a large audience, it kind of gets you excited, right? But what happens if there's not a large audience? Is there potential for that to really bring us down? Or what if the acoustics are really good? Wow, that's really exciting. But what if the acoustics are horrible and you're anticipating that because someone told you that? That's conditions for not doing well. So sometimes what we'll say is that's none of our business. Or that's none of my business. That I will, in the moment, do what I can do, and the things that don't have to enter into my mind and sort of pollute my mind, that I don't want them to. So, in that situation, I think we've all been there, waiting for your audition. We can hear other players and we're questioning, am I prepared? Am I not? How is this going to work out? That, you want to learn and feel comfortable. So sometimes the advice we hear is like, try to get in the hall, see if you can hear the acoustics, prepare as best as you can. Those are things we can control. The rest we can't control. It's none of our business. And if you can start to train that, and as musicians, we understand training, we understand practicing, we understand that that gets us better. If we can begin to practice the things that are actually mental training, it really helps us not only in our lives, but as musicians and artists. So I'm really big at the moment in thinking about mental training and mental toughness. And toughness, I don't want anyone to think that that means ignoring problems or that it means not dealing with things that are real. Maybe it means not dealing with things that aren't real.
mhm.
And some of
It's
those, sometimes those things
uncontrollable.
we talked about, uncontrollable, or the voices in our mind that we're anticipating issues before they've even happened, those aren't real.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I like how I'll always remember that little piece of advice you just gave me because I've always used the roller coaster analogy for performances and stuff like that to get me excited, even when the butterflies start, to start thinking
Mm.
about the roller coaster analogy of just like, I'm gonna end up loving this moment and looking back and being like, wow, that was a great time, that was a great memory. But I kind of like how you said, oh, that's probably because the nerves you feel beforehand is because of the uncontrollable aspects of the performance or the audition, the stuff that you're not in control of. And as I continue on in my clarinet journey and I'm doing a lot more performances and auditions and all those things, I'm really starting to notice how much the uncontrollable factors, how many that there are, and how it can really affect a performance. But what it is so freeing is that you are able to say, I'm not in control of that. Like it's going to be what it's going to be. And it's almost just going to aid in the uniqueness of the performance and of the audition because a little variety in like the room and how you play and what time you got up and what you ate and just all those things will just aid in just a super unique, like never before done performance.
Yeah. And I loved how you framed that. You said the uniqueness of this performance, and that sounded so positive. That sounded so positive, and I think that's a great way of looking at it. That we can celebrate that this is likely going to be a unique performance. Now, we don't want it to be out of control. We don't want it to be beyond maybe what you've prepared, but to just know that every performance is unique. And as you were talking there too, I'm remembering something that my dear friend, Dr. Christine Carter, teaches at Memorial University in Newfoundland, Canada. She does a lot of work with performance nerves. And one time she was doing a class for us at Colorado State University. And one of the things she talks about is how these feelings in our body, whether you call them nerves or anxiety, they're actually our body preparing us to do something amazing. If you think about it, like our body is preparing and our mind is preparing to do something amazing, which is to perform music. And sometimes I like to tell students and tell people that, as musicians, we're like magicians. We're doing something so amazing that we've worked so long we're basically taking something, an instrument, maybe in this case, the human body, and out of thin air, we're creating something. We're creating music. We have a language that we're imparting on the world. And how amazing is that? And so, those nerves could be getting us prepared for something. That's something she says. And sometimes, for example, like before a studio class performance at Colorado State, I might just openly talk about it and say, okay, the person performing, you're about to perform. How do you feel? They feel a little nervous. And I'll go, great, look at this. And fantastic, they're feeling nervous. This is great. Because sometimes we think about words like nerves or anxiety as real negative things. But what if we turn those into positive things as well? Like, wow. And sometimes for some people, it's useful not to even use the word nervous or anxiety, but instead change that feeling into excited.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, we have a sense of what nervous feels like. We have a sense of what anxiety feels like. And I guess I'm not talking about anxiety that's like maybe debilitating or medical. So just the type of nerves or anxiety that we feel that are anticipation of something. Now, we only know those to be nerves or use the word anxiety because someone attached a word to it when we were young and we understood, oh, okay, that feeling I'm feeling, adults called nervous.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of framed in like a bad
Exactly.
framing. Yeah.
So sometimes, because from time to time I'll still start to feel those feelings. And what I'll tell myself is like, ooh, I'm getting excited. Okay, I'm getting excited here. Look at me. I'm getting excited. All right. And I'm about to play and I'm looking at my hands and I'm like, they're shaking. I'm like, wow, I'm so excited that my hands are shaking. Oh my God, this is amazing. So, we all have to find our ways of reframing what we do to make it so that we can be more positive or succeed in what we're doing. So for me, sometimes that helps. And even sometimes in the middle of performances, my mind may not be nervous at all. Like I may not be thinking I'm nervous, but all of a sudden I may feel those sensations like shortness of breath. I may feel that my legs are shaking. And it's an interesting sensation because my mind is pretty calm and I am very comfortable, but I still will sometimes get physical sensations that feel like nervousness. And what I've done is trained my mind to continue to stay calm, to kind of ride that roller coaster, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
ride that wave, to also tell me it's okay. Because our first thought when we're short of breath, our hands are shaking, or our legs or something, is, oh no. We're like, oh no, this is really bad. Because we're thinking, then this means I'm not going to be able to make the phrase, and then this means I'm not going to, and then this. And in those moments, I think it's good to just observe and say, okay, that's happening, and that's okay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm still going to do the best that I can. I've still
Right.
prepared this, and I'm just going to go focus on the training and what I've prepared to do and what I want to do with this phrase and how I want to express this idea
Mm-hmm.
and put so much more mental energy and effort into what I want to do, into what my intention is, into what my vision is, than to let something that might be happening physically or in my mind distract me from my vision, my goal, my intention. And that way we can supplant those negative feelings. And especially when we succeed in doing that, then there's so much power there. We can say, oh, that really worked. That's what I'll do.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were saying all that, it reminded me of when I was doing the bulletproof musician training. I didn't do like the formal, pay for the whole class. I kind of like read a little bit of his book and I just found it really fascinating. But I remember him specifically talking about that thing where he kind of framed it as the feeling you get when you're nervous and the feeling you get when you're excited, like your physical response is the same for
Yes.
both of them. It's a matter of how your mind frames it.
Mhm.
And that was like a really interesting fact to me. And so when I kind of got back into the performance space, I kept trying to say to myself, if I ever got nervous, like, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. But it was hard at first to train myself to think positively rather than negatively. So I was a little discouraged when at first it took a while for me to get used to getting into this frame of thinking, but now I feel like I'm in a place where I'm starting to realize this just takes practice, just like everything else. It takes a lot of practice for mental training. And so I almost just want to say for um, everyone listening to this, like it's okay if, you're not mastering it. Um, you're not mastering it immediately. And of course, I'm not the expert here. Maybe you can agree with me on this, hopefully. But
No, I
that's just kind of been my
agree.
experience with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone is in their own stage and level of understanding of these types of things, right? There
Yeah.
will always be there will always be, for example, first year music students in college or conservatory. It's just going to forever keep happening. And so we're always going to have those who haven't been exposed, that don't maybe know the resources or the books or the material that can help them grow. And something you said I caught, which was so powerful, is that you said, I hadn't yet learned to think more positively instead of thinking negatively. And that's like a big mission for me, especially for musicians. So I have this talk, this keynote talk that I give to music colleges around the country called The Musician's Advantage. And I believe strongly that I think musicians and artists are the most incredible people in this world, that we can do so much. But unfortunately, the world's also kind of told us that there's so much we can't do. And unfortunately, that so much of our musical training actually gives us sort of a negative experiences, I'll just say. And some of it is quite natural. We are put into studios. And of course, in studios, you can't help but compare yourself to others. And then you're performing in front of people who are of your instrument. They know exactly the types of things you're working towards. That's not a great environment for well, I would say it's very easy to slip into fear and negative thinking. And then even teaching. Teaching has a certain amount of, you prepare for something, you come into your lesson, you play, and then the teacher stops you, and what's the first thing you're expecting to hear is how you can make something better.
Mhm.
And we can frame it as, well, I didn't do that well. That's why the teacher's telling me what I can do better. So, and I bring this up because those things on their own are not negative. It's about how we interpret those things. And it's very, I would say, very easy as humans to interpret what we do wrong and how we're wrong and how we're bad. And I think because, for example, classical music, quote unquote classical music, has a certain style and aesthetic and a history that we're trying to learn. And so we're not born being classical music experts. Of course, we're going to stumble. We're going to want to learn. And so my point in bringing this up is for that musician's advantage talk is that there's so much that we do that is actually incredible and that is an advantage in terms of how we can be in the world and how we can relate to others, all of the types of things that sometimes people don't think about. And I like to reframe our life and our work as artists and musicians as something that's incredibly positive and how we can use all of the advantages of our training to make for a better world, better lives for ourselves, versus I think sometimes we get caught in the negative of what we do. So I just wanted to bring that up because you touched so eloquently on this idea of thinking more positively versus framing what you were thinking of as negative.
Yeah. I think it's I mean it could be just me, but in my opinion, I think it's probably just a normal human response, I think,
Totally.
to think negatively about yourself rather than thinking positively. It's kind
Yeah,
of
and it's a very human thing to compare, right?
yeah.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
partly how we learn.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as musicians, that's the number one thing that kind of tears us down from doing the thing that we love. And so I think it's so great that you are trying to promote this new way of thinking.
Yeah, because we tear ourselves down, and unfortunately, sometimes we tear others down, which
Mm.
I think is tragic. And absolutely, it's a different way of thinking, and I think we're in a sort of dawn of a new age in terms of how humans relate to each other. And I think like podcasts like this and your openness and willingness to want to have these conversations is another beautiful platform where we can hear this from people. I haven't had the chance to speak at length so much about these types of thoughts and feelings and that I have, and you're giving me this platform as well that I hope reaches people, and that there are people listening that also believe that that is a better way forward.
Yeah, I'm so glad I could provide this platform for you and just all the other guests that I've had on who are just so amazing. This is just one of the things that I love doing. I love hearing these stories and sharing them. And my intention with this podcast was to never make it about myself because I am still a student. I'm about to pursue my master's next year. Just finished auditions, so. I'm excited to potentially go and do my master's next year. So I'm still a student, kind of not a professional, but so my goal for this was to never make it about myself, but to make it about some of the experts and the people who have the experience and can share their insights and their stories with people like me and everyone listening who are just love the clarinet and just want to continue to improve and get better.
Yeah, I love it. And of
Yeah.
course, no doubt you're learning as you're having these interactions as
Mhm.
well, right? And everyone
Yeah.
listening is learning a little bit too.
Oh, I feel so honored because I'm just a girl with a microphone and I reach
Sounds pretty
out.
powerful to me.
And I just be bold and just like, hey, I love what you're doing in the clarinet world. Do you want to come and talk with me? And surprisingly, more often than not, people say, yeah, I would love to. And then we sit down and have a great conversation. And it's moments like these where I sit down and it's just like, wow, like how lucky am I to have, people like you and other professionals I've had on the podcast just take an hour of their time to just sit down and talk with me and just entrust me with what it is that they're saying for me to put it on my podcast and promote it and everything. I just love what I do. And I love that I was able to have you on today and you share all your wisdom. I could tell that you have such a heart for um, making people better and just bringing out the best in people, which I think is just so great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, before we wrap up, do you have a specific place where people can find you? Do you have any events coming up where we could go see anything like that?
Yeah, so people can always find me on my website, wesleyferreira.com. I've been putting more recently on my Instagram, and sometimes I'll put it on Facebook as well. These short reels that are just me speaking about the type of things that I mentioned today,
Yeah.
the type of things that musicians, where their power lies, and so people can, check that out.
Hmm.
I continue performing in a couple weeks. I have another tour that I'll be playing up in Canada, and then I'll actually be visiting Truman State University to do a residency there, and then out to California to perform. I'm performing a concerto with the Fort Collins Symphony in May. I teach in Oklahoma at a summer camp in June. So I always have lots of projects and ideas and engagements on the go. And, I might just leave in your podcast by sharing this message, which is Of all the things we talked about today, it does take practice, but also it then allows you to do something. Because at heart, I'm hopefully like a lot of the listeners, a clarinet player, like a musician, an artist. And when you can get to the point where you can free yourself from some more of these negative feelings, or free yourself from these inhibitions that you have, it actually plays out in your music. So for me, the most exciting thing personally that I've witnessed for myself as I've grown as a musician and artist, and someone who has an intention and a vision of sharing this beautiful music with the world, is that as I've had less inhibition, less nerves, or less anxiety, more confidence in myself, it absolutely comes forth in your music, and you unlock deeper and deeper layers of your expression. And things that previously maybe held you back don't hold you back. And there's incredible power in that. And that's one of the most exciting things about all this.
Yeah, really well put. It was so great having you on. I will, as always, put links to everything down below. If you have any like albums or anything you'd want to share, just send them to me, and I'll be sure to share them everywhere. And yeah, it was super great having you on.
Yeah, great to be on, and thanks for what you're doing for our clarinet community.
Of course, it's a pleasure.